The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1882, and Adelaide Owens watched her father's face turn the color of week-old ash as he read the words that would destroy everything she had ever known. She sat across from him in the breakfast room of their grand house on Main Street in McGill, Nevada, her fingers wrapped around a teacup painted with delicate roses, completely unaware that in less than an hour she would be standing on that same street with nothing but the dress on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck. "You have been seeing that drifter," her father said, and his voice was so quiet it made the hairs on Adelaide's arms stand straight up. "The one who works at the Davies Ranch." Adelaide set down her teacup with trembling hands. She had been careful, so careful. The meetings with Gideon Nash had been brief and stolen, moments caught between her charity work at the church and her scheduled visits to the milliner. Just conversations, nothing improper, though she knew her father would never see it that way. Gideon was a cowboy, a man who lived in a bunkhouse and earned $30 a month breaking horses. Her father, Charles Owens, owned the only bank in McGill, and 3 others scattered across Nevada. The distance between their worlds was measured in more than just money. "Father, I can explain," she began, but he raised one hand and she fell silent. "Mrs. Henderson saw you speaking with him behind the general store last Thursday. She was kind enough to write to me immediately." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "I have spent 25 years building this family's reputation. Your mother, God rest her soul, came from Philadelphia society. She gave up everything to follow me out here when I was building my first bank. She raised you to be a lady, to marry well, to understand your place in this world." "I do understand," Adelaide said, and she could hear her voice shaking. "But father, he is a good man. If you would just meet him, talk to him, I will do no such thing." Her father stood, his chair scraping against the polished wood floor. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered despite his 50 years, and in that moment he looked like a stranger. "You will end whatever foolishness this is immediately. You will accept the courtship of Thomas Blackwell. His father owns half the silver mines in this territory, and the marriage will secure both our futures." Adelaide felt something crack inside her chest. Thomas Blackwell was 43 years old, already buried 2 wives, and had a way of looking at her that made her skin crawl. "I will not marry him." The words hung in the air between them. Her father's face went from ash to deep red. "What did you say?" "I said I will not marry him." Adelaide stood as well, her legs unsteady but her voice growing stronger. "I am 20 years old, father. I know my own mind. Thomas Blackwell is not a good man, and I will not tie myself to him for the rest of my life simply to increase your business holdings." Her father moved faster than she expected, crossing the room in 3 long strides. For a moment she thought he might strike her, but he stopped just inches away, his breath hot on her face. "You ungrateful girl! After everything I have given you, this house, your education, your position in society, and you would throw it all away for some saddle tramp who will never own more than the horse he rides." "I love him," Adelaide said, and only as the words left her mouth did she realize they were true. She had been afraid to admit it even to herself, but there it was, plain and simple. She loved Gideon Nash with his quiet voice and his gentle hands, and the way he looked at the mountains at sunset like he was seeing something holy. Her father stepped back as if she had slapped him. "Get out. Father, get out of my house. If you will not obey me, if you will not honor your family and your mother's memory, then you are no daughter of mine." His voice was cold now, cold and final. "You have 1 hour to leave. Take nothing but what you are wearing. Everything else belongs to this family, and you have forfeited your place in it." Adelaide felt the blood drain from her face. "You cannot mean that." I have never been more serious about anything in my life. 1 hour, Adelaide. And if that cowboy of yours will not take you in, you can discover exactly what the world looks like for women with no family and no money. Perhaps that will teach you the value of what you are throwing away. He walked past her without another glance, his footsteps echoing through the house that had been her home since she was 5 years old. Adelaide stood frozen in the breakfast room, surrounded by fine china and polished silver, and all the trappings of the life that had just been ripped away from her. Through the window she could see McGill stretching out under the bright Nevada sun, the mountains rising in the distance like watchful giants. She thought about running after her father, begging his forgiveness, agreeing to marry Thomas Blackwell and forget she had ever met Gideon Nash. The thought lasted perhaps 5 seconds before she dismissed it. She had spoken the truth. She loved Gideon, and even if he did not love her back, even if he turned her away when she showed up at the Davies Ranch with nothing to her name, she could not marry Thomas Blackwell. She would rather starve. Adelaide walked upstairs to her bedroom, moving like she was in a dream. The room looked exactly as it had when she woke up that morning. The 4-poster bed with its embroidered coverlet, the wardrobe full of fine dresses, the vanity table where her mother had taught her to pin up her hair. She touched her mother's silver locket, the only jewelry she was wearing. Her father had said she could take nothing but what she had on, and she would honor that even if it killed her. She would not give him cause to say she was a thief as well as disobedient. She changed from her morning dress into her most practical day dress, a navy blue cotton that buttoned up to her throat. She put on her walking boots and her simplest bonnet. In the mirror, she looked pale and frightened, her dark blonde hair already escaping its pins, her gray eyes too wide in her face. She looked like a woman heading toward disaster, which she supposed she was. The walk from her father's house to the Davies Ranch took 2 hours in the September heat. McGill was not a large town, but the ranches that supplied it with beef and horses sprawled across the desert valley, connected by rough dirt roads that turned to mud in winter and dust in summer. Adelaide had never walked this far in her life. By the time she saw the ranch buildings shimmering in the distance, her feet were blistered inside her boots, and her face was burning despite the bonnet. The Davies Ranch was a sprawling affair, corrals and outbuildings surrounding a low adobe house with a covered porch. Adelaide could see horses in the nearest corral, and the sound of men's voices drifted on the hot breeze. She had only been here once before, accompanying her father on some business matter she had not paid attention to. She had seen Gideon in the corral that day, working with a young horse, and something about the patience in his movements had caught her attention. Their eyes had met across the dusty space, and that had been the beginning. Now she walked across the ranch yard feeling like every eye was on her, though in truth there were only 2 ranch hands visible, and they were focused on repairing a section of fence. She headed toward the barn, thinking she might find Gideon there, but before she reached it a voice called out, "Miss Owens." She turned to see Mr. Davies himself, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a permanent squint from years under the sun. He was standing on the porch of the main house, a coffee cup in one hand. "Mr. Davies," Adelaide said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I am looking for Gideon Nash. Is he here?" Mr. Davies set down his coffee cup and came down the porch steps. "He is out with the herd checking on some new calves. Are you all right, miss? You look like you have walked a fair distance in this heat." "I have." Adelaide swallowed hard, trying to gather her composure. "I need to speak with Gideon. It is urgent." Mr. Davies studied her for a long moment, taking in her dusty dress and her worn face. "Why do I suspect this has something to do with your father?" Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes and forced them back. My father has disowned me. I have nowhere else to go. The words sounded absurd spoken out loud, like something from a melodrama in a cheap novel. But Mr. Davies did not laugh or dismiss her. Instead, his weathered face creased with concern. "Come inside, Miss Owens. Get out of this sun and have some water. I will send someone to fetch Gideon." "I do not want to impose," Adelaide began, but Mr. Davies waved this away. "Nonsense. Come on now, before you collapse out here." The interior of the ranch house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Mrs. Davies, a plump woman with flour on her hands and a warm smile, fussed over Adelaide like a mother hen, settling her at the kitchen table with a glass of cool water and a damp cloth for her face. Adelaide had never been treated so informally by anyone, and the kindness of it nearly broke her composure entirely. It took 20 minutes for someone to find Gideon and bring him back to the ranch house. Adelaide heard his boots on the porch, heard his voice speaking quietly with Mr. Davies, and then he was in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He was not a particularly tall man, perhaps 5'10", but he was lean and strong from years of hard work. His face was tanned and lined around the eyes, though he was only 23. When he saw Adelaide sitting at the kitchen table, those brown eyes went wide with alarm. "Adelaide, what happened?" She stood up too quickly and the room swayed. Gideon crossed to her in 3 long strides, catching her elbow to steady her. His hands were rough and warm, and the touch sent a shiver through her despite the heat. "My father found out," she said simply, "about us. He demanded I marry Thomas Blackwell, and when I refused, he disowned me." Gideon's face went pale beneath his tan. "He what? He gave me an hour to leave his house with nothing but what I was wearing, so here I am." Adelaide tried to smile and failed. "I am sorry. I did not know where else to go. If this is too much, if you want me to leave, I will understand. I can go to the church, perhaps. Father Gregory might stop," Gideon said quietly. His hands were still on her arms, steadying her. "Stop apologizing. This is not your fault." "It is, though. If I had been more careful, if I had not spoken to you where people could see, then we would never have spoken at all, and that would have been worse." Gideon looked over his shoulder at Mr. and Mrs. Davies, who were hovering in the doorway with matching expressions of concern. "Can she stay here? Just for a few days until I figure something out. I will pay for her room and board." "Do not be foolish," Mrs. Davies said briskly. "Of course she can stay. We have a spare room, and Lord knows this house could use some feminine company besides just me." "But Gideon, you know what people will say. Charles Owens is a powerful man in this town, and if he has disowned his daughter, let them say what they want," Gideon said, and there was steel in his voice that Adelaide had never heard before. "I do not care." But Adelaide cared. She knew exactly what people would say, and worse, what they would think. A disowned daughter living on a ranch with cowboys would be labeled a fallen woman before the week was out. Her reputation, already destroyed in her father's eyes, would be completely ruined in the eyes of McGill society. Not that she had much use for McGill society at the moment, but still. The reality of her situation was settling over her like a cold blanket despite the heat. "I cannot stay here long," she said quietly. "I need to find work, some way to support myself." Gideon and the Davies exchanged glances. Adelaide knew what they were thinking. There was precious little work for respectable women in McGill. She could perhaps be a teacher, but the current teacher was young and healthy and showed no signs of leaving. She could be a seamstress, but Mrs. Chen, who ran the dress shop, had all the help she needed. The only other options were cooking or cleaning in the saloons, and that was no option at all for a woman who wanted to keep any shred of reputation. "We will figure something out," Gideon said firmly, "but first you need to rest." You look ready to fall over." He was right. The events of the morning, combined with the long walk in the heat, had left Adelaide feeling hollow and strange. Mrs. Davies led her upstairs to a small bedroom under the eaves, simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. As soon as Adelaide lay down on the bed, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to darkness and the sound of voices drifting up from below. Disoriented, she lay still for a moment, trying to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back and she sat up, her heart pounding. The room was cool now, the desert night having swept away the day's heat. Through the small window she could see stars scattered across the black sky, more stars than she had ever seen from her bedroom window in town. Adelaide got up and smoothed her rumpled dress, then made her way carefully down the narrow stairs. The voices were coming from the kitchen. She could hear Gideon speaking in low, urgent tones, and Mr. Davies responding. "Cannot marry her just to make this respectable," Mr. Davies was saying. "That is not fair to either of you." "I am not doing it just to make it respectable," Gideon replied. "I have wanted to marry her since the first time we spoke. I just never thought she would actually consider someone like me." Adelaide's hand went to her throat. She had not expected such a plain declaration, and it made something warm bloom in her chest despite everything. "Gideon, be reasonable," Mrs. Davies said gently. "You are a good man and you work hard, but you are a ranch hand. You have $30 a month and a bunk in the bunkhouse. That is no life to offer a woman who has been raised in luxury." "I know that." Gideon's voice was rough with frustration. "Do you think I do not know that? But she is here, and she has nothing, and I will be damned if I let her suffer because her father is a prideful fool. I love her. That has to count for something." Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks. She had hoped in her secret heart that Gideon might care for her the way she cared for him. But hearing him say it so plainly, with such fierce conviction, was more than she had dared imagine. She stepped into the kitchen doorway. All three of them turned to look at her, and she saw her own emotions reflected in their faces: worry, hope, fear. "I love you too," she said to Gideon. "I should have told you before, but I was afraid of what it would mean, what we would lose. And now I have lost everything anyway, and the only thing I am certain of is that I love you." Gideon crossed to her, and this time when he took her hands there was no hesitation. "Then marry me. I know I have almost nothing to offer you. I know your life will be harder than anything you have known. But I swear to you, Adelaide, I will work every day to make you happy. You will never doubt that you are loved." "That is all I have ever wanted," Adelaide said, and she meant it. "I do not need luxury. I do not need society. I just need you." Mrs. Davies made a soft sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "Well, I suppose that settles it then, though we should think practically. Gideon, if you marry, you cannot keep living in the bunkhouse. You will need a home." "There is the old line shack up near the northern pasture," Mr. Davies said slowly. "It has not been used in years, but it is still standing. With some work, it could be made livable." "I will do whatever it takes," Gideon said, his eyes never leaving Adelaide's face. "When can we marry?" "We should speak to Father Gregory tomorrow," Adelaide said. "But Gideon, are you certain? Once we do this, there is no going back. My father will never forgive me, and by association he will make your life difficult. He has influence in this town." "Then we will deal with it," Gideon said simply. Together. They were married 3 days later in a quiet ceremony at the small Catholic church on the edge of town. Father Gregory, who had known Adelaide since she was a child, performed the service with tears in his eyes. The only witnesses were Mr. and Mrs. Davies and 2 of the ranch hands who worked with Gideon. Adelaide wore the same navy dress she had been wearing when she left her father's house, and Gideon wore his cleanest shirt and a string tie borrowed from Mr. Davies. There were no flowers, no music, no reception afterward. But when Gideon slipped a simple gold band onto Adelaide's finger and said, "I do," she felt richer than she had ever felt in her father's grand house. The line shack that would become their home was a rough structure about 5 miles from the main ranch house, built decades ago to house cowboys during the spring and fall roundups. It consisted of one room with a stone fireplace, a dirt floor, and windows covered with oiled paper instead of glass. The roof leaked in 3 places, and there was a family of mice living in one corner. Adelaide stood in the doorway on her wedding day, looking at this place that was now hers, and felt a wave of panic so strong it nearly knocked her over. How was she supposed to live here? She had never cooked a meal in her life. She had never cleaned anything more substantial than her own bedroom. She had never hauled water or chopped wood or done any of the 1,000 tasks that would now be required of her every single day. Gideon came up behind her, carrying the few supplies Mrs. Davies had helped them gather. "I know it is not much," he said quietly, "but I promise I will make it better. We will make it better together." Adelaide turned to face him, this man who was now her husband, and saw the worry in his eyes. He was afraid too, she realized. Afraid that she would regret this, that she would realize what she had given up and come to resent him for it. "It is perfect," she lied, and then, because she could not bear the doubt in his face, she kissed him. It was not their first kiss. They had shared one brief, desperate kiss the night before the wedding, but it was the first time they had kissed as husband and wife, with no one watching and nothing to stop them. Gideon's arms came around her, strong and sure, and for a moment Adelaide forgot about the dirt floor and the leaking roof and the impossible task ahead of them. That night they lay together on a bedroll spread near the fireplace, learning each other in the flickering light. Gideon was gentle and patient, aware of her inexperience, and when it was over, Adelaide lay in his arms feeling like she had discovered a secret that all of society's rules had been designed to keep from her. This closeness, this intimacy, was worth more than all the fine dresses and china teacups in the world. "Are you all right?" Gideon asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am better than all right," Adelaide said, and this time it was not a lie. "I am exactly where I want to be." The first weeks of marriage were harder than anything Adelaide could have imagined. She woke at dawn to help Gideon with his chores before he left for the day's work. She learned to build a fire, though more often than not it smoked and filled the cabin until her eyes watered. She learned to haul water from the creek a 1/4 mile away, though the buckets were heavy and her shoulders ached for days. She learned to cook over an open fire, burning more meals than she cared to admit before she started to get the hang of it. Mrs. Davies rode out once a week to check on her, bringing supplies and advice and boundless patience. She taught Adelaide how to make bread, how to mend clothes, how to do laundry in a tin tub. She showed her how to use the few vegetables that still grew wild around the line shack to make their meager supplies stretch further. "You are doing well, Mrs. Davies said one afternoon, watching Adelaide knead bread dough with hands that were already developing calluses. "Better than I expected, to be honest." "I do not feel like I am doing well," Adelaide admitted. "I feel like I am constantly failing at everything." "But you keep trying, and that is what matters." Mrs. Davies patted her shoulder. "You know, when I married Mr. Davies and came out here from Missouri, I cried every single day for a month. I had never seen land so empty, sky so big. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life." "What changed?" Adelaide asked. "I stopped comparing my new life to my old life. I stopped trying to be the person I was in Missouri and started figuring out who I needed to be here. And I realized that this life, hard as it is, gives you a freedom that society never allows." Out here, you can be exactly who you are. Adelaide thought about this as she worked the dough, feeling the rhythm of it in her hands. She was not the banker's daughter anymore. She was not Adelaide Owens of Main Street, McGill, with her fine clothes and her social obligations. She was Adelaide Nash, wife of a cowboy, living in a line shack in the desert. And maybe, just maybe, that was all right. Gideon came home each night exhausted, his face lined with weariness and his clothes covered in dust. But he always had a smile for Adelaide, always asked about her day, always helped with whatever tasks needed doing before they slept. On his day off each week, he worked on improving the cabin, patching the roof, installing a proper door, building a rough table and chairs from scrap wood. Slowly, the line shack began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. In October, the first real cold snap arrived, and Adelaide woke one morning to find frost on the ground and her breath misting in the air. The cabin, which had been stifling in the summer heat, now let in every draft. Gideon spent a full day chinking the walls with mud and straw, but it only helped so much. They went to bed piled under every blanket they owned, clinging to each other for warmth. "I am sorry," Gideon whispered in the darkness. "I wish I could give you better than this." "Stop apologizing," Adelaide said, echoing his own words from weeks ago. "I chose this. I chose you, and I would choose you again every single day." She meant it. Life was hard, harder than she had ever imagined, but there was a simplicity to it that she was beginning to appreciate. Wake up, do the work, sleep. No social calls to make, no appearances to keep up, no one watching to see if she used the right fork or said the right thing. Just her and Gideon and the vast desert sky. In November, Adelaide went into town for the first time since her wedding. She needed fabric to make a warmer dress for the winter, and Mrs. Davies had convinced her that she could not hide forever. She rode into McGill on the back of Gideon's horse, sitting in front of him with his arms around her, feeling both protected and terribly exposed. The stares started as soon as they reached Main Street. Adelaide felt them like physical touches, saw women whispering behind their hands, saw men's eyes follow her with expressions that ranged from pity to something darker. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, the way her mother had taught her, but inside she was trembling. They stopped at Mrs. Chen's dress shop, and Gideon helped her down from the horse. "I will wait right here," he said quietly. "You do not have to do this if you are not ready." "I am ready," Adelaide said, though she was not sure that was true. Mrs. Chen's shop was warm and smelled of fabric and dye. The little Chinese woman looked up from her sewing machine when Adelaide entered, and her face creased into a smile. "Miss Adelaide, or I suppose it is Mrs. Nash now, yes?" "Yes," Adelaide said, grateful for the warmth in Mrs. Chen's voice. Not everyone in McGill had turned against her then. "I heard what happened with your father, very sad, but you marry for love, that is good, that is how it should be, Mrs. Chen came around the counter and took Adelaide's hands in her own small ones. "Now, what can I help you with today?" They were looking at bolts of wool fabric when the shop door opened again and two women entered. Adelaide recognized them both, Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had written to her father about seeing her with Gideon, and Mrs. Blackwell, Thomas Blackwell's mother. They both stopped short when they saw Adelaide. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "if it is not the banker's daughter." Or should I say the former banker's daughter? Adelaide felt her face flush but kept her voice steady. "Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Blackwell, good afternoon." "Is it though?" Mrs. Blackwell's face was hard as stone. "My son was devastated when your father told him you had run off with some cowboy. After all the planning, all the arrangements, you humiliated him." "I am sorry for any hurt caused to your son," Adelaide said carefully, but I could not marry someone I did not love. Love. Mrs. Henderson said the word like it tasted bad. What does love matter when you are living in a shack in the desert, doing your own laundry and cooking over a fire like some common pioneer? You had everything, Adelaide, everything. And you threw it away for what? A man who will never be anything more than a hired hand. Something hot and fierce flared in Adelaide's chest. Gideon is worth more than all the silver mines in Nevada. He is kind and honest and good. He sees me as a person, not as a business arrangement or a path to social advancement. And yes, our life is hard. But it is ours, and I would not trade it for anything your world has to offer. Mrs. Chen was beaming behind the counter. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Blackwell looked like they had both swallowed something sour. "You will regret this," Mrs. Blackwell said coldly. "When winter truly sets in, and you are cold and hungry and realize what you have given up, you will regret this. Mark my words." They swept out of the shop in a rustle of silk skirts. Adelaide stood frozen, her hands shaking, until Mrs. Chen came around and squeezed her arm. "You very brave," she said softly. "Not many women have courage to choose their own path. Your mother would be proud." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes. "I hope so." She left the shop with a length of dark green wool tucked under her arm, a gift from Mrs. Chen, who had refused payment despite Adelaide's protests. Gideon was still waiting with the horse, and one look at her face told him something had happened. "What is it?" "Just some unpleasant words from unpleasant people," Adelaide said, trying to smile. "It does not matter." But it did matter, she realized as they rode back toward the ranch. Those women represented the entire world she had been raised in, the world that had defined her worth and her future. And they had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in it, that she had committed an unforgivable sin by choosing love over security. The weight of that rejection settled over her like a heavy cloak. That night, as she and Gideon lay in their bedroll, she told him everything that had been said in the dress shop. He listened in silence, his jaw tight, his arms around her. "You regret it?" he asked finally. "Marrying me, I mean, giving up that life." Adelaide thought about it, really thought about it. Did she miss her comfortable bedroom? Yes. Did she miss having someone else do the cooking and cleaning? Absolutely. Did she miss not having to worry about whether they would have enough food to last the winter? Every single day. But did she regret marrying Gideon? Did she regret choosing a life with him over a life of hollow comfort and loveless duty? "Not for a single second," she said, and she turned in his arms to kiss him, to show him with her body what her words could not fully express. She loved him. That was the truth that mattered more than any comfort, any social standing, any material wealth. Winter came to the Nevada desert with a vengeance. The line shack, for all Gideon's improvements, was barely adequate against the bitter cold. Adelaide learned to dress in layers, to wrap her hands in rags before going out to fetch water from the creek, which now had ice forming at its edges. The wood supply Gideon had laid in seemed to dwindle at an alarming rate, and he spent his one day off each week cutting more. Food became a constant concern. Their supplies were limited to what they could afford on Gideon's wages: flour, salt, beans, a little bit of salt pork. Adelaide learned to make a dozen different variations of beans and bread, trying to keep their meals interesting with the few herbs and spices Mrs. Davies shared with them. She learned to trap rabbits, though the killing and cleaning of them made her sick the first few times. She learned which winter plants were edible and which would make you ill. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. They had no money for gifts, but Gideon surprised Adelaide by carving her a small wooden box with her initials on the lid. She gave him a scarf she had knitted from wool Mrs. Davies had given her, the stitches uneven but made with love. They roasted a rabbit for their Christmas dinner and told each other stories by the fire, and Adelaide thought it was perhaps the best Christmas she had ever had. In January, Adelaide realized she had not bled in nearly 2 months. She said nothing to Gideon at first, afraid to hope, afraid to add another worry to his already burdened shoulders. But when February arrived and still nothing happened, she rode to the main ranch house to talk to Mrs. Davies. The older woman took one look at Adelaide's face and smiled. "You are with child." It was not a question, but Adelaide nodded anyway. "I think so. I am not certain, but the signs are there." Mrs. Davies pulled her into a tight hug. "Oh, my dear, that is wonderful news. Does Gideon know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told him." "And I am frightened, Mrs. Davies. We barely have enough for the 2 of us. How will we manage with a baby?" "The same way everyone manages," Mrs. Davies said practically. "One day at a time. Babies need less than you think. Love, milk, warmth. You can provide all of those." That night, Adelaide told Gideon. They were sitting by the fire after supper, and she simply said it. "I am going to have a baby." Gideon went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide and searching. "Truly, truly." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. Adelaide had seen Gideon happy before, but this was different. This was joy, pure and unfiltered. "We are going to have a child. Are you pleased?" Adelaide asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Pleased?" Gideon laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Adelaide, I am more than pleased. I am terrified and thrilled and so happy I can barely speak. A child, our child." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, and Adelaide felt some of her fear ease. They would figure this out, just like they had figured out everything else, together. The spring of 1883 was a time of careful preparation. Gideon built a cradle from scrap wood, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters to harm delicate baby skin. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes from fabric Mrs. Davies gave her, cutting up an old dress to make soft gowns and blankets. They saved every penny they could, putting aside a small fund for the doctor when the time came. Adelaide's body changed as the baby grew. Her belly swelled, her back ached, her ankles puffed up. The work that had been hard before became nearly impossible. Gideon took over more and more of the household tasks, hauling water and cooking when he came home from long days on the range. He never complained, never made her feel guilty for her limitations. In May, when the desert was blooming with wildflowers, Adelaide was hanging laundry outside the cabin when a figure on horseback appeared on the horizon. She shaded her eyes, trying to make out who it was, and her heart gave a painful leap when she recognized the horse. It was her father's bay gelding. Charles Owens rode up to the cabin and dismounted with the stiff movements of a man who did not ride often. He looked older than Adelaide remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his hair more gray. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "Father," Adelaide said finally, her hand going protectively to her swollen belly. "Adelaide." His voice was rough, as if he had not used it much lately. "I heard you were expecting. News travels fast in a small town. It does." He looked around at the line shack, at the rough corral Gideon had built, at the vegetable garden Adelaide had planted. "This is how you are living." It was not a question, but Adelaide answered anyway. "Yes, this is our home." Her father's jaw tightened. "I came to offer you a way out. Come back." "Leave him. I will tell people the marriage was never valid, that you were coerced. We can say the child is from a brief relationship with someone suitable. No one needs to know the truth." Adelaide felt anger bubble up in her chest, hot and fierce. "The truth? The truth is that I love my husband. The truth is that I am happier here, in this cabin that leaks when it rains, than I ever was in your grand house. The truth is that Gideon is a better man than Thomas Blackwell could ever hope to be." "He is a cowboy," her father said, and there was real anguish in his voice now. "He will never be able to give you anything. You are living in poverty, Adelaide. Your child will grow up with nothing." "Our child will grow up with love," Adelaide shot back. "With two parents who chose each other, who work together, who will teach them that people matter more than possessions." "That is not nothing, father. That is everything." Her father looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression crumbled. "Your mother would never forgive me if I let you live like this. Mother married you when you had nothing but dreams and ambition," Adelaide said quietly. "She followed you out here to the frontier and left behind everything she knew. She would understand exactly what I have done, and she would approve." Her father flinched as if she had struck him. "I loved your mother. I know you did, and I love Gideon the same way. If you ever loved mother, if you ever understood what it meant to choose someone against all sense and reason, then you must understand why I cannot come back with you." They stood in silence, father and daughter separated by more than just the dusty ground between them. Finally, Charles Owens reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather purse. He held it out to Adelaide. "I cannot force you to come home, but I will not see my grandchild starve. Take this. Buy what you need." Adelaide stared at the purse, temptation warring with pride. They needed the money so desperately, but taking it would feel like admitting her father was right, that she could not make this life work without his help. "I do not need your charity," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It is not charity. It is what any grandfather would do for his daughter and grandchild." He set the purse down on the rough bench outside the cabin door. "I do not approve of your choices, Adelaide. I still believe you have thrown your life away. But you are my daughter, and I cannot turn my back on you completely. If you change your mind, if you need help, you can always come to me." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word, and Adelaide stood watching until he disappeared from view. Then she picked up the leather purse with shaking hands and looked inside. There was more money than she had seen in months, enough to buy proper supplies for the baby and food for the winter, and perhaps even glass for the cabin windows. She was still standing there, the purse clutched in her hands, when Gideon came home that evening. He took one look at her face and knew something had happened. "Your father was here," she said simply, and she showed him the money. Gideon's expression was unreadable. "What did he want?" "He wanted me to come back. He said he would tell everyone the marriage was not valid, that we could pretend this never happened." Adelaide swallowed hard. "I told him no." "And the money?" "He said it was for the baby, for his grandchild. He said if I ever needed help, I could come to him." Adelaide looked up at Gideon, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I do not know if I should keep it. It feels like accepting defeat somehow." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon where her father had disappeared. "Your father is a proud man who made a mistake. This is his way of trying to make amends without admitting he was wrong. If you send it back, you will hurt him. And more than that, you will hurt yourself and our child out of pride. So we should keep it. I think we should use it to make our life better. Not because we cannot survive without it, but because there is no shame in accepting help from family. Your father may not approve of me, but he loves you. Let him do this one thing." Adelaide threw her arms around Gideon's neck, the money purse caught between them. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "Lucky," Gideon laughed softly. "Adelaide, you gave up everything for me. I am the lucky one. Every single day I wake up amazed that you chose this life, that you chose me." "I would choose you again," she said fiercely. 1,000 times over I would choose you." They used the money carefully, making it stretch as far as possible. They bought real glass for the windows, which made the cabin brighter and warmer. They bought fabric for baby clothes and diapers. They bought a better stove that would heat more efficiently. and they set aside a portion for the doctor when the baby came. In late July, on a sweltering afternoon when even the lizards seemed too hot to move, Adelaide's labor began. Gideon rode like a madman to fetch Mrs. Davies and the doctor, leaving Adelaide alone in the cabin with instructions to breathe and not push until they returned. It was the longest hour of her life, each contraction cresting like a wave that threatened to drown her. Mrs. Davies arrived first, bustling into the cabin with all her supplies and a calm, capable air that immediately soothed Adelaide's panic. "All right now. Let us see where we are." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, a gruff man named Dr. Morrison who had delivered half the babies in McGill County. Between contractions, Adelaide wondered what he thought of being called out to a line shack in the middle of nowhere to deliver a cowboy's baby. But if he had opinions, he kept them to himself, focusing on his work with professional efficiency. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Adelaide had never known such pain was possible, pain that seemed to split her open and remake her into someone new. She clutched Gideon's hand and screamed when she needed to scream and pushed when Mrs. Davies told her to push. And finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the little cabin. "A boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the red-faced, squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Adelaide sobbed with relief and exhaustion as Mrs. Davies cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Then she placed him in Adelaide's arms, and Adelaide looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in a way she had never imagined possible. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and perfect. "He has your eyes," Gideon said softly, his finger tracing their son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around Gideon's larger finger, and Adelaide watched her husband's face transform with wonder. "We should name him," Adelaide said. "What do you think of Gabriel?" "Gabriel Nash," Gideon tested the name. "I like it. Gabriel for the angel who brings good news." "Good news and new beginnings," Adelaide agreed. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Davies stayed for another hour, making sure both mother and baby were stable, before heading back toward the main ranch house. They left behind instructions for Adelaide's recovery and congratulations on the healthy birth. Alone in the cabin with their son, Adelaide and Gideon simply stared at the tiny life they had created. Gabriel slept in his new cradle, his small chest rising and falling with each breath, completely unaware of the complications his existence represented or the love that surrounded him. "He's going to grow up so different from how I grew up," Adelaide said quietly. "No fancy house, no servants, no social standing. He will grow up knowing he is loved," Gideon replied. "And knowing that his parents chose each other against all odds. That seems like a good foundation to me." Adelaide leaned against her husband's shoulder, exhausted but happy. "I thought I knew what love was before I met you. I thought it was something gentle and polite, something that happened between suitable people at suitable times. But this, what we have, this is real. This is worth everything I gave up and more." "You are richer than any fortune to me," Gideon said, echoing words he had spoken to her once before, in the early days of their courtship when she had worried about what she could offer him. "You and Gabriel both. I would be poor as dirt and still count myself the richest man alive." The months that followed Gabriel's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless demands. Adelaide learned to nurse her son, to soothe his cries, to function on snatches of sleep grabbed whenever the baby dozed. Gideon helped when he could, walking Gabriel around the cabin at night when Adelaide was too exhausted to move, changing diapers and singing off-key lullabies. In September, when Gabriel was 2 months old, Adelaide took him into town for the first time. She dressed him in his best gown, wrapped him in the blanket her mother had embroidered years ago, and rode into McGill on the back of Gideon's horse. She was not going to hide anymore. She was not going to let the town's judgment keep her away. They went to the general store first, needing supplies. Adelaide walked through the door with her head high and her son in her arms, ready for the stares and whispers. But something had changed. The women who saw her did not turn away in disgust. Instead, they crowded around to see the baby, cooing over his dark hair and his bright eyes. "He is beautiful," one woman said, and Adelaide recognized her as someone who had been at her father's house for tea once, back in another lifetime. "Thank you," Adelaide said carefully, waiting for the judgment to come, but it did not come. Instead, the women asked the normal questions new mothers always get asked. How old is he? Is he sleeping through the night? Is he a good baby? And Adelaide found herself answering, found herself relaxing into the simple pleasure of talking about her son. Later, as she and Gideon walked down Main Street, she realized what had changed. The baby made her real in a way she had not been before. She was not just the banker's rebellious daughter anymore. She was a mother, with all the struggles and joys that entailed. And that was something every woman in town could understand and relate to. They walked past her father's bank, and Adelaide saw him through the window. He looked up, saw her and the baby, and for a moment their eyes met. Then he gave a small nod, just a tiny acknowledgement, and returned to his work. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. That winter was easier than the first. They had better supplies, a warmer cabin, and the joy of watching Gabriel grow and change. He smiled his first smile in November, a toothless grin that made both his parents melt. He laughed for the first time in December, a gurgling sound that was the best Christmas gift they could have asked for. In the spring of 1884, Mr. Davies called Gideon into his office. Adelaide watched her husband walk toward the main house with trepidation, wondering if something was wrong. But when Gideon returned, he was grinning. "He is making me foreman," Gideon said, sweeping Adelaide up in his arms despite her startled laugh. "The current foreman is retiring and Mr. Davies is giving me the job. It comes with better pay and a house. A real house, Adelaide, with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes. "Truly, truly." He said, "I have proven myself, that I work harder than any man he has ever employed, and he likes you, likes how you have managed in circumstances that would have broken most people." Gideon set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "We are going to be all right, better than all right." The house that came with the foreman's position was not grand, but to Adelaide it might as well have been a palace. It had wooden floors instead of dirt, real glass windows, a kitchen with a proper stove. There was a bedroom for them and a small room for Gabriel, and a parlor with space for the furniture Gideon promised to build. They moved in on a warm May afternoon, carrying their few possessions from the line shack. As Adelaide stood in her new kitchen, looking out the window at the mountains in the distance, she felt something settle in her chest. Contentment, she realized. She was content. Over the following years, their life took on a rhythm. Gideon worked hard as foreman, earning the respect of the men under him and the trust of Mr. Davies. Adelaide tended their home, and their growing family. Gabriel was joined by a daughter, Lily, in 1886, and another son, James, in 1888. The children grew up running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, their skin tanned dark from the desert sun. Adelaide never fully reconciled with her father, though their relationship thawed somewhat over time. Charles Owens visited occasionally, bringing gifts for the grandchildren he was too proud to fully claim. He taught Gabriel numbers and letters, set up a small trust for each child's education. It was not the relationship Adelaide had once hoped for, but it was something. In 1890, when Gabriel was 7 and Adelaide was 30, she received word that her father had suffered a heart attack. She rushed to his grand house on Main Street, the house that had once been hers, and found him in bed, pale and weak but alive. "Adelaide," he said when he saw her, and his voice was thin and breathless, "I need to tell you something." "Save your strength," she said, taking his hand. "No, I need to say this while I can." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "I was wrong about Gideon, about your marriage. About everything. I let my pride and my plans blind me to what was truly important. You were right to choose love. Your mother would be proud of you." Adelaide felt tears stream down her face. "Father, let me finish. I am changing my will. Half of everything goes to you and your family. Not because I am trying to buy you back, but because you are my daughter and you deserve it. I should have supported you from the beginning." He coughed, wincing. "That cowboy of yours, he is a good man, better than I gave him credit for. He made you happy, and that is all a father should want." "He did," Adelaide said softly. "He does." Her father smiled, a real smile that made him look years younger. "Then I can die knowing at least I admitted I was wrong." "You are not going to die," Adelaide said fiercely. "Not yet. Your grandchildren need their grandfather." Charles Owens squeezed her hand. "Stubborn, just like your mother." He lived another 5 years, long enough to see Gabriel grow tall and strong, to watch Lily become a bright and curious girl, to hold baby James on his knee and tell him stories about his grandmother. When he finally passed in the winter of 1895, he died knowing that his daughter was happy, that his family would be provided for, that he had made his peace. The inheritance changed their lives in practical ways: a bigger house, better education for the children, security they had never known, but it did not change what mattered. Adelaide and Gideon were still partners, still best friends, still deeply in love after more than a decade of marriage. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1897, Gideon took Adelaide up into the mountains on horseback, just the two of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Davies. They rode to a high meadow filled with wildflowers, the same meadow where Gideon had first told Adelaide he loved her all those years ago. "You remember this place?" he asked as they dismounted. "I remember everything about that day," Adelaide said. "I was so terrified and so hopeful at the same time." "I was just terrified," Gideon admitted with a laugh. "Terrified you would realize what you were giving up and change your mind." "Never." Adelaide took his hands, looking up at the man she had chosen, the man who had chosen her back. He was 37 now, his face more lined, his hair touched with gray at the temples. But his eyes were the same, warm and kind and full of love. "You told me once that I was richer than any fortune to you." "I meant it then and I mean it now," Gideon said. "I know. But I need you to understand something. You saved me, Gideon, not from poverty or from my father, but from a life that would have slowly killed everything that makes me who I am. You gave me freedom. You gave me love. You gave me a life that matters. So when you say I am richer than any fortune, I need you to know that you are my fortune. You are everything I could ever want or need." Gideon pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of their first kiss and the comfortable familiarity of their 1000th. Around them, the wildflowers swayed in the breeze and the mountains stood eternal and the vast Nevada sky stretched overhead. "What do you want to do now?" Gideon asked when they finally broke apart. Adelaide smiled. "I want to go home. Home to our children and our life, and everything we have built together. That is all I have ever wanted." They rode back down the mountain as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and red and purple. And Adelaide thought about the girl she had been 15 years ago, standing in her father's breakfast room with her world crashing down around her. That girl had been terrified but brave, had chosen love over security, had walked into an unknown future with nothing but faith and hope. She would want to tell that girl that it had all been worth it. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt, because that uncertain future had become this certain present, full of love and family and meaning. The banker's daughter was gone, but Adelaide Nash was here, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. In the years that followed, life continued its steady rhythm. Gabriel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved horses and the open range as much as his father did. Lily became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch for the children of the cowboys and nearby homesteaders. James showed an aptitude for business that reminded Adelaide painfully of her own father, and she guided him with a gentle hand. Gideon and Adelaide grew old together, their hair silvering, their hands growing gnarled with age and work. But they still held hands at the dinner table, still shared a bed every night, still found reasons to laugh and love. When their grandchildren asked Adelaide about the old days, about growing up in the grand house in town, she told them stories, but she always ended the same way. "I thought I was losing everything," she would say, "but really, I was finding everything that mattered. Your grandfather told me I was richer than any fortune to him, but the truth is we were both rich. Rich in love, rich in family, rich in the life we built with our own hands, and that is the best kind of wealth there is." On a warm spring evening in 1920, Adelaide sat on the porch of the house they had lived in for nearly 40 years. She was 68 now, her once dark blonde hair now white as snow, her body stooped with age. But her mind was sharp, and her heart was full. Gideon sat beside her in a rocking chair he had built 20 years ago, his hand covering hers. "You ever regret it?" he asked, a question he had asked her 100 times over the years, and she gave him the answer she had given him every time. "Not for a single second." "You are still the best choice I ever made." Gideon smiled, the same smile that had captured her heart 4 decades ago. "You are richer than any fortune to me," he said softly. "And you are mine," Adelaide replied. They sat together as the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built a life worth living. Their children were grown, their grandchildren were thriving. Their story was told and retold as an example of what true love could overcome. When Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep, 2 years later, with Gideon holding her hand, her last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage to choose love, for the years they had shared, for the family they had created. She had been the banker's daughter, raised for a life of comfort and social standing, but she had become so much more. She had become Adelaide Nash, beloved wife, devoted mother, cherished grandmother. And that was the richest legacy anyone could leave behind. Gideon followed her 6 months later, unable to bear life without his partner, his love, his Adelaide. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had called home, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription: "Richer than any fortune." Their children and grandchildren gathered at their graves each year, telling their story to the next generation, making sure it was never forgotten. The banker's grand house on Main Street in McGill eventually became a museum, a testament to the boom days of Nevada mining. But the little house where Adelaide and Gideon raised their family remained occupied by their descendants, passed down through the generations. And every couple who lived there learned the story of how it all began. With a disowned daughter, a cowboy who saw her worth, and a love that proved stronger than any fortune money could buy. In the end, Adelaide had been right. She had chosen love over comfort, passion over security, and in doing so she had found the life she was meant to live. Her father's money had helped, certainly, but it was not what made her rich. Her wealth was measured in the children she raised, the love she shared, the life she built with her own two hands beside the man who valued her above all else. And somewhere in the vast Nevada sky, in the mountains that stood eternal and the desert that bloomed each spring with wildflowers, their love story lived on. A reminder that true wealth is not counted in gold or silver, but in the people we love and the choices we make for that love. The banker's daughter had been disowned, but she had gained so much more than she lost. And the cowboy who had told her she was richer than any fortune had been right all along. They had been rich beyond measure, and their fortune was love.